Hi, so welcome, I'm Dirk. I will show you around the Pickles solution. So I opened Pickles here in Visual Studio 2017. You can of course use 2019. Don't know if it's still gonna work on all the version of Visual Studios, but hey, who wants to use those, huh? Right, as you can see, there are a couple of folders in the solution and a bunch of projects. First off, there's the NuGet folder with a packages.config. Those are a couple of packages that are general to the entire solution, not particular to one project. I believe that if you upgrade Pickles to use the newer project format where the references to the packages are determined automatically, that maybe you can get away with this. You can do away with this file. That's something you can look into. The next folder contains a couple of build scripts. I'm using currently fake, so F# make. There's nothing magical about it. This was at a time when I was trying out the different build servers. I was trying out different ways of building the solution. Since those days, Visual Studio has improved noticeably in the build definition area, like defining a build inside a project. So if you're not a fan of fake, this is not set in stone. You'll find that a whole lot of things in Pickles are not set in stone. Hello, there's my cat coming in the picture and briefly saying hello. That's Sammy, named after Sam in Lord of the Rings. And yeah, so we were talking about the build scripts. So they're using fake, F# make. So there are 4 of those scripts. The first one is for building the projects with all the solutions, where they should get built and so on. My knowledge of F# is actually not all that good, so there are probably ways of writing this enumeration of different targets using some kind of for loop and an array of data, whatever. For me it was okay to just put everything after one another. There's a second script which does a similar thing, which enumerates all the projects that contain unit tests and define to run the unit tests. Yeah, and so there's I don't know if you have experience with F# make, but it basically goes like you run a certain target within the file, for example the tests target, and that depends on a whole lot of other targets, which in each of these targets runs the tests in one particular project file. So then there are two more build files. The one is for building the NuGet packages, for publishing Pickles to NuGet. There are 3 packages being built here. The one for the command line, where we publish Pickles as an exe runner on NuGet. Then there's the one where we package the MS build runner, so you can actually have Pickles run as part of the regular Visual Studio build. The reference to Pickles are added to the project file. Actually, I'm not quite sure how nice this plays with the new project file format in Visual Studio. And then there's the PowerShell runner of Visual Studio. That's also, also it's another script where it takes all the libraries that are included in Pickles and publishes this to the appropriate output directory. So and the fourth build file is for Chocolati, where we publish Pickles to Chocolati. And here we publish two packages, the first the regular command line, and then the second one the GUI. Yeah, those are the four build scripts using F# make. One big thing looking toward the future, I've always felt that on the one hand this F# make was really nice. I felt that it was sort of nice to disconnect the build definition from the project file definition. On the other hand, it's a lot of it's extra maintenance work, and admittedly my F# is not that good, so I was always a bit struggling. There is another project called C# make out there, but I don't believe it was ever that well equipped as F# make. Anyway, maybe these days there are totally different build libraries out there that make this a breeze, so feel free to investigate in that direction and change some things. Okay, closing the files now, and continuing to the next directory where we have a couple of new specs. That's the entire definition of the Pickles command line runner in Chocolati, with a nice text. You will notice that it includes some markdowns, very simple markdown, a couple of placeholders, the owners, Jeffrey Cameron, Dirk Rombouts, and the authors. Well, once you start maintaining the project, you can of course edit yourself in there. A couple of links and so on, and of course the entire definition of what is which libraries are necessary. So there's a new spec file for Pickles and Pickles UI, so for the command line and for the GUI version for Chocolati, and then again we have new spec files for NuGet for the command line version, and as build version, and the version without special name, and that's the PowerShell version. Historical reasons. The PowerShell version of Pickles was the very first one, and that is known as just Pickles on NuGet. Right, those were the new spec files. Right, then the next directory, the next folder in the solution is the runners directory, where the four kinds of executables, the four kind of runners of Pickles are defined. So Pickles uses pretty good design patterns in that all the logic is contained within a business logic assembly, and then there's just a very small assembly that contains the executables, reads the parameters, passes them to the business logic. So let's start with the business, with the command line version first. As you can see, despite there being a whole lot of files in here, there's actually only a very few real files in there. There's the program file that does some autofac magic, passes the command lines, then it does some work on logging basic things. It retrieves a runner, which is a abstract class that kicks off the process of running Pickles, then runs the thing, walks a bit, and exit returns. That's basically it. There's really not much that's being done here. There's another class, the command line parser. So we are using a third-party library for that, NDisk options. That has been with us for a long time. That's one of the hot candidates to replace because it's not being actively maintained anymore as far as I know, and last time I checked I don't think there was a .NET Core version of it. So Pickles is still running on the full framework. There's no .NET Core magic in there at the moment. If you want to go that direction, then NDisk options is one hot candidate to replace. So here in the options set we have defined the command line parameters. We pass them, do some logic about them, and yeah, that's it. So summarizing, the command line, the pickles.command line project is about reading the command line parameters in the way that is proper for, in this case, the command line, and taking those command line parameters, getting a runner through AutoFac and starting the process. You will see that for the next runner, for version that's actually even simpler, the MS Build version, this sort of contains the arguments and starting the process in one place, because now I will add something more. There's MS Build target definition, which defines basically the command line, or in this so the command line arguments, in this case the project file arguments. So this define which program, which parameters we receive from the runtime, from the MS Build runtime. The MS Build runtime will inject the values of those parameters directly into these properties in feature directory, output directory, language, and so on and so on. This happens automatically because we derive the Pickles class from the task class. Yeah, and then again, a bit of logging, some AutoFac magic, resolving the configuration, resolving the runner, running, and go. Oh yes, there's still some work to be done for capturing the configuration and so on. Again, it's very basic. Right. For the PowerShell version, very similar scenario. Again, we have values injected into properties just like with the MS Build version. This time this is done by the runtime automatically because we derive from PowerShell commandlet, some AutoFac magic, resolving configuration, resolving the runner, passing the parameters. So here there's a bit of magic to be done, but yeah, at the end of the day it's again resolving the configuration, resolving the runner, running the runner, and doing things. Okay, before I go to the next one, to the user interface, I will say a few words about the other files in these projects. Let's go back to the command line. Since this is an application or an executable, we have of course an app config, which contains some reader assembly bindings, nothing spectacular. I'm using nlog to provide some logging, so we have an nlog an nlog configuration. We have an XSD file that defines the schema of the nlog configuration. There's a packages.config. Again, if you upgrade Pickles to the new style of project files, then you can get rid of this file. Programs files we already had. Oh yes, then there's a settings file of stylecop, which, as you can see, is a pretty empty thing. Yeah, I used to be quite, how do I say this politely, quite adamant about styles and having them verified automatically by stylecop and so on. I'm not so much into that anymore, but I never really removed the infrastructure of it. So it's there, you can use it. However, because I haven't been using it really extensively, if you start using it, expect lots of style violations. I tried to stick to the styles as far as humanly possible, but the stylecop will pick up, will probably pick up some more. Yeah, and then there's a linked file on version info that contains a lot of things. It's auto-generated. This is part of the build stuff done by F#make, and the build batch files that I wrote, they set the assembly version automatically, so there's no need to manually set build numbers and so on. That's done automatically. So basically, don't mess around with this file. It's auto-generated anyway. And last but not least, we go back up. Assembly info, that contains a few assembly information stuff that are particular to this particular project. Right, and so the other projects have more or less the same kind of supporting files. You can see that there's even a unit test project for the command line. This is mostly about testing whether the command lines are read correct, the arguments are read correctly. Good. Then there's the user interface project, where this defines the GUI version of Pickles. That one is a bit more convoluted than the command line version of Pickles, of course, because we have a UI to define. So I'm using Windows Presentation Foundation as a framework for this GUI. I'm also using the model view model pattern, and to support me in all that, I use the MVVM Lite libraries from Galasoft. So they're pretty good. They stay pretty much in the background. Yeah, I have a number of support classes for the model view model things, like event handler extension, raising events in a slightly more convenient way, a multi-selectable collection. So if you start the GUI of Pickles, you will see that there are a number of checkboxes that you can use. You can select multiple of them. They're checkboxes after all, not radio buttons. I use that collection as a basis for that. So if you've done any work at all with the model view model, you will find these classes pretty easy to work with. Feel free to ask any more detailed questions if you have particular questions. Right. Good. I'm gonna skip the settings directory for now. Go straight to the view model. So this is actually a pretty small directory. There's the main view model. There's only one screen in the Pickles GUI, the main screen, so there's only one main view model. It's basically, in its most simple form, a collection of configuration values. This being Windows Presentation Foundations, I had to create dependency properties and all that. The dependency properties are not in the. Okay, I'll just edit this out. So the main view model class is in its simplest form a bunch of configuration properties that hold the configuration values for Pickles. It also contains a number of command files that will these relay commands bind to actions in the GUI, and for example, whenever you click a button, when you click on the generate PowerShell command button, then this particular command will be executed. The relay command itself is part of the MVVM Lite libraries. It has a couple of callbacks when you click on the button in the UI, then automatically this command file gets invoked, and that infrastructure will invoke the callbacks. Good. A lot of wiring up in the constructor, definition of properties, so it's really not too exciting. Here are two interesting methods: save to settings and load from settings. This is responsible for taking all the values that are defined in the user interface and saving them to disk when you close the application, so that next time you open the application you get the exact same settings as when you stopped working the last time. Okay, yeah. This is a class that binds to the UI, so there's lots of notify property change going on. That if I have some input, then if some correct input, then the correct check mark is shown, and so on. So a lot of that stuff. Yeah. There's also a possibility. That was a feature that was requested often, that people want to use the Pickles GUI not to actually run Pickles, but to configure other versions of Pickles. So, for example, people like to use the PowerShell version, but they don't like to write all the configuration parameters, so they wanted to configure everything in the UI and then generate a PowerShell script to run Pickles. That's what the do generate PowerShell command is for. The same for the command line interface. Okay. Yeah, and then the do work method, creatively named, is the one that does the actual work. Where when you click on the big button to generate the documentation, then it goes through all the selected output formats and then starts running all the work generating the documentation. So all this work, in the bad old days, we would have this directly into the click event handler in the button in the UI layer. Thanks to the model view model architecture of Windows Presentation Foundation, all this event handler code is relegated one layer deeper into the view model. I will also show you where the view is. So here's the view, the good old split this view between design and XAML code. Yeah, so there's no code in the XAML file at all. And I was talking about the work button earlier. That's bound to the generate button. Command binding generate pickles. And if I click on that button, then the generate pickles command. Here the public I command generate pickles property. This one will be so this is the property that is bound to the button. When I poke the button, then the generate command button that command is executed. Find usages, where are you? Come on. Aha. So when setting up the generate command, I take a relay command with two callbacks, do generate and can generate, whether the button should be enabled, and actually doing the work. It's actually generating the stuff in the background on a background thread, and that calls the do work method. Okay, what else do we have in here? We have the app XAML file, which defines some resources for the model view model light. The model view model light library, you need to provide a view model locator to tell them where the view model is. That's really yeah, it's basically some registering of dependencies and then retrieving the main view model instance. So nothing spectacular, the kind of code you write once and then basically never have to touch again. The cool checkbox XAML is designed to have a checkbox that looks like the flip on a mobile phone. Back in the days when Windows Mobile or Windows Phone was still a thing, they had the cool flipping checkboxes over there. This XAML file brings that design to the Pickles GUI. Right, main window we already had, nlog again packages an icon file with nice Pickles logo, style copy version info. So I'm now going to briefly run the application, the GUI, so that you can get an idea of what all the things are. And so there's so the Pickles GUI is a way to collect a lot of configuration information. For example, the directory where the feature files are located. You will notice that there's this little X at the end. Whenever you provide valid input in there, it will turn into a check mark, like it's already here in the drop-down for Gherkin language. Yeah, so feature directory, output directory, whether So if you want to exclude scenarios based on tag, then you put it in there. You can choose one or more output files. And I do recommend that if you create multiple output formats, that you put each of them in a separate directory. So flipping this switch will turn that object on. Yeah. There's also here a switch to include experimental features. Experimental features include support for mathematical expressions and so on. To be quite honest with you, I'm not sure how well used those features are. So, and they're experimental in the sense that they may not be entirely stable yet. So, yeah. So you can make a judgment call there whether you want to continue investing in these experimental features and maybe even remove them altogether. Okay. So those were the 4 runners. Oh yes, there's another unit test. Yeah, so the user interface project contains a couple of unit tests that test the functionality to create a command line interface command or a PowerShell command from the configuration in the UI. So those were the 4 runners. And now that we've dealt with all the front matter, so to say, let's go one level deeper in the onion and talk about the business logic. So, Pickles has, well, the Pickles, so Pickles has a lot of things in here. The Pickles project is really where all the magic happens. It's the part that reads the file, the Gherkin files, processes them, builds up a tree, and then walks through the tree and generates output elements for each of the parts in the tree. That's all done in here. So most of the general work will be done inside the Pickles project. Then there's a whole lot of other projects here. So, at the time it felt like a good idea. So there was a phase where I was looking into plugin-like architecture for Pickles, where it would be easy for other. So I wanted to make it easier for other developers to contribute their own output files. And unfortunately, it never got that far. But as a preparation for that, I split each output format of Pickles into its own project, and I was then envisioning dynamic loading and stuff. Yeah. Looking back, several years later, looking back, I think, okay, this was a typical case of Yagni, the way it's gonna need it. I recommend taking all these projects to all these output formats and put them into one project again, and okay, create a second project that has all the unit tests inside. As the payoff for having different projects never arrive, and it has a considerable penalty. The build times just increased noticeably when having all these separate project files and files to be copied around, even on an SSD. So I recommend putting those output files, those output formats back into one common project. Conversely, for the test frameworks, like read test results from Cucumber, from MS Test, NUnit, Spectron, and so on and so on. I never got around to separating those out into separate projects, and I'm happy about that, Good. There's one a bit odd project. That's this one. That defines the dynamic HTML output format in Pickles. That one works a bit differently. Because the usual project files just work, the usual output formats work by, okay, here's the tree of features that we build in memory, and then we walk through the tree and output the elements as we go, and the result is then a complete website or a complete Word document or whatever. The dynamic HTML version works differently in that in the background we use the JSON output provider, so we output all data in a JSON file, and the dynamic HTML output format then at the runtime reads this JSON file and populates the page in the browser with that data. So this project really defines only the page in the browser, the look and feel, the JavaScripts that do the behavior. The actual data comes from a JSON data file that is generated by the builders, the Pickles documentation builders.json format. Right. There's some test classes, and lastly we have an object model that contains node elements and feature elements and image elements and so on for all the elements in the tree of feature files. We have a directory, we have the documentation builder, an interface that is implemented by several other classes, one for Cucumber, for HTML, Excel, and so on and so on. And the actual object model, which contains a lot of common example feature, keywords, scenario, and so on, like the usual elements in feature files. Wait a second. We are using a relatively old version of the Gherkin library, and I gather that in recent versions there's one or two keywords that have been added. So if you upgrade to the newest version of the Gherkin library, you will need to extend the object model here with the new keywords, and of course for all the output providers, they need to be extended as well to generate some output for the new keywords. Okay. That was an overview of the project structure. I'm gonna leave it at this for now. In next video I will dig a bit deeper into the inner workings of the Pickles project and one of the documentation builders.